Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to table the annual report of the Surface Reclamation Fund for the fiscal year ending March 31, 1987. The assets of the fund now total $63.5 million, Mr. Speaker.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of the Environment, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Environmental Research Trust awards grants to facilitate innovative research in areas related to environmental management and improvement. And each year, the Minister of the Environment presents an award to one recipient as recommended to him by the Trust. The award is presented for excellence and innovation in environmental research. In 1988, the award is being presented to Hansen Materials Engineering of Edmonton for developing a unique quality control procedure used to prevent leakage from various types of structures used to contain hazardous wastes. In the members' gallery today is Mr. Gary Stewart, the Chief Executive Officer of Hansen Materials Engineering, and several members of the Alberta Environmental Research Trust. Mr. W. Carey of Canmore, Mrs. Betty Duckett of Grand Centre, Mr. W. Neese of Mirror. Another member of the Trust is our colleague, the MLA for Olds Didsbury, Mr. Roy Brassard. Mr. Speaker, I would ask these individuals to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, it is with pleasure that I introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 105 students from Holy Trinity Catholic High School, a community school situated in beautiful Edmonton Avonmore, who are here today seated in the public and members gallery. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Phyllis Schumacher, Mr. Joe Patrone, Mr. George Robert, and Miss Judy Wright. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this assembly.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the legislature 14 young women, 12 to 15, from the beautiful countryside of Gibbons and Westlock Sturgeon constituency. They belong to the Gibbons Pathfinders, Mr. Speaker, and they're accompanied by their Pathfinder leader, Mrs. Evelyn Gibbons, and two parents, Russell Ovell and Donald Hood. They are seated in your public gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I would rise them now to get the ask them to rise for the customary welcome of the legislature.
Member for Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 8 members of the Edmonton Principal Protection Association. I ask them to now rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the provincial treasurer was asked questions about a $100 million Treasury branch loan to one Peter Pocklington, Mr. Speaker. And I quote the answers to those questions, Mr. Speaker. He says, the government was not involved in this loan and did not have knowledge of this loan. Later on to another question, no, I did not know about the transaction. Mr. Speaker, now Mr. Bray, the superintendent of the Treasury branch, has since refused to take the rap for this outrageous transaction. In fact, he has clearly stated that the treasurer was informed of this loan before it was given. Now, my question to the Premier, what action has he decided to take to replace this treasurer, do something with this treasurer who deliberately gave false statements to this House about this very important matter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, in the prelude to the question, garbage about the Mr. Bray refusing to take the rap, I think is absolute disgraceful lead-in to a question. Mr. Bray said nothing of the kind. Mr. Speaker, I reviewed Hansard. I reviewed the comments by Mr. Bray. I discussed it with the provincial treasurer. He advises me that he did not recall Mr. Bray raising it with him. That is fine with me.
Supplementary question. This is unbelievable. $100 million. Oh, I just forgot, Mr. Speaker. $100 million, and the treasurer has that lapse of memory, and the Premier believes that, Mr. Speaker? And my question to the Premier, would he consider replacing this treasurer till he suffers, till he recovers from his attacks of amnesia, Mr. Speaker? Will he at least do that?
Mr. Speaker, the loan was made by the financial institution, the Treasury branch, not by the government, and Mr. Bray was responsible for it. Whether the loan was $55 million or $100 million is something the Treasury branch decides, not the government.
Mr. Speaker, is the Premier standing up in his place to back up this treasurer and say that he really believes that the treasurer didn't remember $100 million to Mr. Pocklington? Is he really that naive, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, the Treasury branch makes loans and millions of dollars to thousands and thousands of businesses in this province, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, I'm very glad they do. We all know that the financial institutions based in Ontario and Quebec withdrew dramatically out of this province over the past several years, and that we're very pleased that we have the Treasury branches who are able to fill the responsibility of lending to Albertans, creating jobs, turning this economy around.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier almost has as big a lapse of memory as the Treasurer about certain important things happening. I hope he remembers the budget tonight, Mr. Speaker. But my question has to do, Mr. Bray made the obvious point that on major loans like this, he would consult with the Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, he made that point. My question is to the Premier. How does the Premier expect average Albertans to believe otherwise, that they somehow make these sorts of $100 million loans without letting the government know?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the financial institution lending depositors' funds to companies, the government neither expects to know or wants to know. These are matters to be handled by that financial institution. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, I can't think of a more foolish situation as if we had the government trying to establish who got loans and who didn't get loans. Obviously, they don't know what they're talking about. They've never understood it. They don't like the idea that the Treasury branch is helping turn around this province, diversifying this province. Everybody knows they don't. Order.
The other day, the chair referred to standing order about the amount of catcalls that go on, and indeed, there's a fair amount that does indeed happen within the free flow of question period. Nevertheless, it's getting to the stage of trying to shout down the answer, and that really is in violation of 13 subsection 4B. Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental, it's also to the Premier, in view of the fact that I'm sure he knows that the MLAs are not allowed to borrow from the Treasury branch. In other words, there is a very close connection between the Treasury branches and the government. Can he tell this House where the limit is that the managers of the Treasury branches can go out and commit to taxpayers of Alberta. If it isn't $100 million, is it $500 million? Is it $1 billion? What limit would he consider the time for the government to say, hold on a minute, we want to be talked to?
Mr. Speaker, the member's got it completely wrong. This is a financial institution that takes depositors' funds and lends them and pays the depositors interest for keeping those funds. We do not guarantee the loans, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
please. The point is made for the second time, and if some members persist, they won't be recognized in question period. Honourable Premier.
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, why the member asked the question if they won't sit there and listen to an answer. Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the government guarantees the deposits of the Treasury branch, but not the loans. We have management to handle that financial institution. That's their job. It's been that way from as long as I've been involved in government, that the Treasury branch is a financial institution. Its lending practices are handled by the management of the Treasury branch. I mean, we would no more know who was getting a loan from the Treasury branch than we would know if you were getting it from the Royal Bank of Canada. No more. And for the members to try and somehow allude otherwise is absolutely false.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton-Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care. In regard to the insurance of contraceptive counseling and care, the Minister stated in this House on December 2nd that he, and I quote, will continue to monitor the situation over the course of at least the next couple of months and then make a decision based on that information. Would the Minister please inform the members of this House the results of his monitoring and the decision that he has made on the basis of that information?
Mr. Speaker, contraceptive counseling was never de-insured.
What's the results of the survey?
What could you then tell us about the result of your de-insuring of contraceptive procedures and family planning counseling?
Mr. Speaker, the facts of the matter are that Alberta was the only province in Canada that had a specific individual fee code for doctors to bill against for contraceptive counseling. As I indicated in this legislature on several occasions last year, we felt there was some abuse of that fee schedule in that contraceptive counseling should be provided by medical doctors on many other occasions when they are providing advice and information and examining their patients during the course of annual visits, during the course of pregnancies, and a number of other times that they have opportunities to do so. So we feel that the medical community has lots of opportunities to provide that kind of information. Mr. Speaker, what I did say we were going to be reviewing and have been is the de-insurance of sterilization procedures, vasectomies and tubal ligations, and the IUD insertions.
Mr. Speaker, data has been collected by the Calgary Board of Health, and in its report last month, it clearly demonstrated that the de-insuring of contraceptive counseling and procedures has worked a hardship on Alberta women. What does the minister say to that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I don't believe that the de-insurance of that particular item as a fee code that medical doctors could charge to has worked a hardship on anyone. Quite the contrary, because that fee schedule is no longer there. We have a saving of an estimated $2 million a year in the health care insurance plan. And if the honourable member will recall in the throne speech last week, there was a significant reference to the initiatives that we will be taking with respect to providing similar kinds of information through other means, so that being largely through the health units and through the budget of the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. It's our view that dollars are much better spent in that area than providing an individual special fee code for medical doctors to bill to when they have every opportunity to provide that information on other occasions.
Mr. Speaker, not only has the Calgary Board of Health, but also the Alberta Council on the Status of Women have recommended that in fact this minister reinsure contraceptive counseling and procedures, and to slough it off to the Minister of Occupational and Community Health is not good enough. Is he suggesting that Alberta Health Clinics do tubal ligations?
Mr. Speaker, the difficulty is that we don't agree with the honourable member's contention that the only thing that we should be doing with respect to contraceptive counselling is putting a fee code back in that medical doctors might be able to bill to. In fact, if the member will look on page 3 of the throne speech in the middle of the page, there's a full paragraph describing the strategy that is being employed by our government with regard to family planning and sexuality education programs. And in due course, the honourable member, throughout the course of the estimates, I presume, will have full opportunity to examine what is being proposed there.
Member for Edmonton Goldbar, supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The minister doesn't believe there's hardship. The boards of health say there is. Public health units don't have the resources. May I ask the minister, Mr. Speaker, did the minister set up or has the minister monitored the results of this action in any way other than through the hundreds of letters of complaints?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have been told by more than one doctor who specializes in women's reproductive health that they didn't even know there existed a fee code for contraceptive counseling prior to the removal of it last August 1st. If the member will be patient enough to hear from the Honourable Provincial Treasurer tonight and then to examine the estimates both of the department I'm responsible for and the Department of Community and Occupational Health, you'll find that we are going to meet the commitment that's outlined in the throne speech on page 3 with regard to this matter at an early date.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, my main question today is to the Minister of Social Services with regard to the case of Norman and Marilyn Peters, who applied in July to adopt a 5-year-old girl and has lived in their home since 15th of December of '84. The girl's birth mother, of course, Mr. Speaker, approved of the adoption. However, as the department, the Social Service Department, has ruled apparently that it should return to the Indian Reserve in Saskatchewan. So my first question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, if the Minister is sincere in saying that each case will be examined on its own merits, what are the particular merits of sending this child back to Saskatchewan?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has acknowledged that he is raising the question about a Native child, and if he would care to consult the Child Welfare Act, he would read a section that indicates that the Director of Child Welfare must, in the instance of a Native child, and I think we would all agree that the Native community and other members of the family as well should be consulted. Members of this particular child's family have indicated that they would like also to have the child on a permanent basis, and visits have occurred, Mr. Speaker, but there has no final decision has been made.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that something's wrong with the laws if it was interpreted that way. But since the girl's birth mother now lives in Calgary and approves of the Peters adoption, what sense does it make to send a child back to a reserve in Saskatchewan when the mother, only because the mother originally came there? She now lives in Calgary.
Mr. Speaker, there are on occasions very awkward moments for the Minister of Social Services and those people charged with some very delicate responsibilities. And most often this speaks to our responsibility for children. And in this particular case, Mr. Speaker, I will comment no further than to say that in respect of this child, I can assure the honourable member that every professional intention, every caring intention by the Department of Social Services and the multitude of staff who have been involved is to speak to the best interests of that child.
Mr. Speaker, assurances aren't good enough. The fact of the matter is that the child, as the minister stated in May of '87, that her, or I shouldn't say in May of '87, her department would exercise the best judgment in these cases. And I don't believe that we have heard any explanation of why that judgment is that the child should be sent back to Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is again speaking to a decision that he purports has been made, and this is not the case. And if the honourable member will further examine the Child Welfare Act, he will come to understand that it is in the best interest of most families for civil servants and the minister not to reveal all details of a case.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. The minister's answer reminds me of King Solomon's solution on how to split the baby. Therefore, then, since the adopting family has approached the Ombudsman about this case, would the minister go this far, Mr. Speaker, that she will order a suspension of any movements until the Ombudsman has heard the case? Will she at least go that far?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the advice and information that the Ombudsman might glean will be of good use, as always, to the Department of Social Services. But I'm totally amazed, based on the honourable member's what I would believe to be superficial understanding of a case. Mr. Speaker, it is not possible that the honourable member can understand all the information associated with the case. And I am not at liberty to discuss it, and I can only once again assure the honourable member that everyone involved is seeking to do the best thing on behalf of the child.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Services, I wondered if the Minister would consider the possibility of establishing a panel consisting of perhaps 3 highly regarded Calgary citizens who would look at this situation from the point of view of the best interest of the child and make a recommendation to the Minister as soon as is practicable.
Mr. Speaker, obviously we must operate under the authorization of the Child Welfare Act, and I believe that there are many processes in place that speak to the best interest of the child, and they are being followed.
Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. The Minister has remained rather silent on the question of
That's unusual in Tell Mr. Speaker about it.
silent
That's what you call noise pollution.
on a commitment that the Premier made and the Minister made in my constituency about 6 or 8 months ago with regards to a dam on the Little Bow River. And I was wondering if the Minister could make that commitment at this time and bring that matter to today's status.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, if the Honourable Leader of the Representative Party has overlooked me and hasn't found me in the last number of months. But the last fall, the Premier and other members of Executive Council went on a very, very successful cabinet tour in southern Alberta. And at that time, the Premier had an opportunity to go out and look at a little river. And there was a great little spot in that river where it may very well be very important that a structure will have to be erected one of these days. It's my understanding that the Provincial Treasurer will be bringing down the budget tonight, and I'm sure that there'll be opportunity in the next several months to deal with the estimates of all ministers of Executive Council, including the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate whether a decision with regards to the Clear Lake matter near Staveley will also be considered at this time this year?
Mr. Speaker, there are 3 aspects to water management in the Little Bow. One deals with Clear Lake, which is a lake on a map in the southern part of the province of Alberta. It has the word lake to it. There's not an ounce of water in it today. There hasn't been an ounce of water in it through 1987. And it's extremely important, I think, that we do get some water into it in 1988. So whatever decision that would be made with a structure on the Little Bow would entail a decision with respect to a diversion of water from Mosquito Creek to Clear Lake.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister of Environment give assurance to the House that before he moves in the bulldozers and starts throwing dirt around, that he will indeed call for public hearings on the project?
Gee, I don't know where the Leader of the Liberal Party has been, Mr. Speaker, but we've had public hearings in that part of Alberta now for nearly 2 or 3 years with respect to this matter. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I believe I've already sent to the Leader of the Liberal Party all the documentation with respect to the meetings were held in the High River, the Nanton, the Carmen Gay area, and throughout. We've got documents, including pictures, which will probably be helpful to the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Member for Calgary Northwest, followed by Athabasca Lac La Biche, followed by Lacombe and Edmonton Glengarry.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Yesterday, some very lucky Canadians shared in the substantial lottery. But earlier this week, you also indicated that Albertans would share in the lottery industry in Alberta, and that some $8.8 million would be used to purchase very special medical equipment. Would you elaborate both on the equipment and the location of this equipment in the province?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that there is interest on this side of the House of that most important initiative. As the honourable member has indicated, we dispersed some $113.7 million throughout the province, and basically in areas dealing with organizations that are manned by volunteers from one end of the province to the other that make decisions on the disbursement of those lotteries proceeds. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there are almost 200 board members from across the province that will be making decisions on the use of these dollars. We did make a special provision for specialized equipment in the area of hospitals, and I asked that the Honourable Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care could maybe make some comments on those facilities.
The Honourable Member, Calgary Northwest.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. A supplementary question to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. What is the rationale for using lottery funds for special projects as opposed to placing those funds in general revenue?
Well, Well, Minister, that question's out of order.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question then to the Minister of Medical Care and Hospitals. What will the impact be on the provision of health care, both from the standpoint of cost and services, to Albertans, recognizing that prior to this, many Albertans had to travel to Spokane and to Vancouver to take advantage of this very special equipment?
Well, the impact will be very substantial in all parts of Alberta, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, with regard to the linear accelerator, which is a radiation therapy machine being purchased with the lottery dollars for the Cross Cancer Hospital in Edmonton, several thousand people a year have radiation treatments here, and existing machines, one of them at least, has been subject to failure, and quite often people have to return week after week to complete their treatments, and some people are on a waiting list as well. So that will be very beneficial to everyone from Red Deer north. In addition to that, the lithotripsy machine, which is going into the Misericordia Hospital and has the capabilities of, without entering the body, of breaking both kidney and gallstones, will be a benefit to everyone north of Red Deer. The same would apply to the lithotripsy machine, which is going into the Holy Cross Hospital in Calgary, and it will provide services to everybody in southern Alberta. And finally, the magnetic resonant imaging machine going into the Foothills Hospital in Calgary, the first fully dedicated clinical machine in Alberta, will mean that we will have enough capability to service all of our needs in Alberta now, and the need for people to travel to other parts of the country or the United States for these kinds of treatments will not occur. Had it not been for the lottery dollars, it simply wouldn't have been possible within our budgetary parameters to purchase these kinds of machines at this time.
Supplementary, Calgary Northwest. Member for Edmonton Centre.
Speaker, every hospital in this province has a wish list of equipment and capital needs which cannot currently be funded. There's certainly in vitro fertilization, new hospital beds in Lethbridge, and so on. Upon what rational basis did the Minister of Career Development choose these particular hospitals and this particular equipment and disregard the priorities and the needs of other hospitals that have other needs for capital equipment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd probably more appropriately refer that to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care.
Mr. Speaker, there was a very good criteria. First of all, we're dealing in the main part, at least with three of the machines, with new technology. And we're dealing as well with the kind of hospital equipment that benefits every single person in the province, or can benefit every single person at some time or another. These are going into major urban referral hospitals, and people in Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, or Lethbridge, or wherever will have the benefits of this technology in Alberta. And the basis of providing lottery funds was simply on the basis we wanted to try to do something in hospital equipment that we couldn't otherwise do, and do something that would benefit Albertans from north to south and east to west. And I think we've accomplished that exceedingly well.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
It's a supplementary to the Minister of Career Development, a surprise question. Can the Minister explain why decisions with respect to the $113 million of lottery funds are made in the back rooms of the Tory caucus and are not brought before this legislature?
Honourable member is clearly out of order because the court case is still pending. Point of order. Fine, it will be acknowledged at the end of the question period. In the meantime, the matter is clearly out of order. The chair recognizes Athabasca Lac-La-Biche, followed by the member for Lacombe and the member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Utilities, it is no secret that the three major power companies have a stranglehold on this province and pretend to be the protectors of the consumers. After 4 years, Alberta small power producers are still waiting for access to the electrical grid at a fair price. Their proposal offers a new source of electrical power, a new source of rural income, and a chance to diversify our economy into the manufacture of small power generation. The recent ERCB PUB report on their proposal is tilted against the small producer and achieve none of these benefits. It is totally unacceptable to the small power producers. Now, will the minister give his commitment today that he will go beyond the recommendation of the report and grant small power producers the price and terms of grid access they are seeking?
Mr. Speaker, I believe the question that came after the speech dealt with the small power producers who I met with on Monday. As a matter of fact, quite a number of them were in. I believe we had something like 15 of them were in at a meeting that we had to discuss their concerns or their interpretation of the joint report by the ERCB and the PUB, and it was our decision jointly to pursue their suggestions and to come back by their two people that they have assigned to the project, working with our officials in the department, to make a recommendation to me within the very near future, and I'll just leave it at that at this moment.
Can the minister at least answer this question? Does the minister support the producer's claim that the bottom line for a viable and sustainable small power sector is the granting of 125 megawatts of access to the power grid at 6.5 cents per kilowatt?
Mr. Speaker, I can't answer that in the positive nor the negative because I do not have all the facts before me to justify either their request for the 6.5 or the total package of 125 megawatts. But we're working on that with them, and that's Mr. Orrin Hart and the small power producers, and I'm sure that within the next little while we'll come up with a solution.
The next little while is not good enough. The Premier promised in Lac-La-Biche on May the 6th, 1986, that he would move on this issue within 2 months of the general election. Now, why are the small power producers and potential small power manufacturers like Southview Fibertech still waiting after 2 years for an action the Premier promised that he would be acting upon within 2 months of the election?
Good question. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows, because he is in touch with that group, that they were required to apply to the Energy Resources Conservation Board. I met with them many times, urging them to do it. Took the initiative to speak to the board, to shorten down the period, to reduce the amount of time and money it would take to make their application. They were still unable to make an application. And I felt very sorry about that, but I urged them in many meetings to continue to try and develop their process and their application. Finally, it has happened. And the Minister of Transportation and Utilities is working with them as well, urging them to please bring their project to a state where it can go ahead. And he may well wish to supplement my comments.
Mr. Speaker, I do, in the sense that the Southview Fibertech project, which
eventually did make an application to the joint hearing of the ERCB and the PUB sometime, I believe, in the period September 1987, and approximately the date that it was to have been heard was a request by them for a deferment until a hearing that took place on January 21, 1988, January 21, 22 of 1988. And it's from that particular hearing that the joint committee of the ERCB and the PUB are judging their report of that relative to the interconnect application by Southview for that particular project. So it has only been since, Mr. Speaker, January 21, 22 that they finally did get an application in to the joint ERCB and the PUB.
2 years is still not 2 months, and the Premier promised basically to expedite this matter, and I don't call that an expedition. Now, will the Premier direct the Minister of Utilities today to exceed the recommendation of the report, which clearly favors the utilities over the small power producers, and finally fulfill within the next month, his promise of fair access at a fair price?
Mr. Speaker, I have expedited the process. I think we should reject the honourable member's comments that the Energy Resources Conservation Board is somehow distorting a decision. And I think the member should consider whether he really wants to make that charge against the Energy Resources Conservation Board. Because, Mr. Speaker, obviously that board is an independent body who has a responsibility under legislation to rule on these matters. And he is saying, and is clearly saying, that they have come up with some kind of a distorted answer. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, I would have thought the better thing to get this project moving would have been some help from their MLA rather than playing politics with it.
Edmonton Meadowlark on a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is to the Minister responsible for utilities. Has the Minister assessed the potentially strong impact that small power production can have on job creation and regional economic development in the rural areas of this province, or is this simply another case of putting the interests of large business over small business?
Mr. Speaker. Oh, didn't mean to wake you up. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the small power producers and the possibilities of jobs, of distribution, I guess you could say diversification, all of those factors are very much a part of our working with that organization to this particular point to get, for example, the hearing that they requested a year ago, they being the small power producers, which was held by the jointly with the ERCB and the PUB, to arrive at some of the questions that were asked by the organization. What is the definition of small power? How much small power could be effectively included or added to the grid, keeping in mind that we have an excess of power in the province of Alberta today, keeping in mind that we have the lowest cost ability to produce power by the use of coal. But keeping all of those things in mind, we've been working with the small power producers to provide them the opportunity to look at the possibility of a wind farm, individual windmills on some of the farms, small hydro projects, biomass projects similar to the Southview project that is in the Athabasca area at this present time. All of those are being considered by us with vigor.
Member for Lacombe, followed by Edmonton Glengarry.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister of Social Services, and it relates to some statements made in the House yesterday by the member from Millwood. Now, he made some very clear, concise statements in here. One that he related to the honesty of the people on this side of the House, and the other that in the province here we have daycare centers that are not fit for animals to live in. My question to the Minister of Social Services, has she any knowledge of even one daycare center in this province not fit for animals to live in?
Mr. Speaker, it's a very serious matter that was raised yesterday, and as a matter of fact, I had a copy of Hansard provided for me because I wish to approach the honourable member for Mill Woods. I'm absolutely appalled that no relating of the daycares that he would have been alluding to in his comments here in his own constituency would have been drawn to my attention, and I'm sure all honourable members will understand that it would be expected of them to make comment if they believe they have an operation that is unfit for children. Mr. Speaker, insofar as we are aware, there are times certainly when we are concerned about the operation of some daycares to the extent that the Minister herself has made a stop order on that daycare, but none from Mill Woods, Mr. Speaker, has been drawn to my attention at this moment.
Martin Lass.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I would think that any responsible citizen that had knowledge, first-hand knowledge of such a situation wouldn't wait to make political hay on it, but would take immediate action on behalf of those children. But my question, supplementary to the Minister, is what are the basic standards for such operations that we recommend?
Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that some of the members in the official opposition have not read, including the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who continues to speak and, as a matter of fact, smiles through a very serious discussion. Mr. Speaker, there are some 28,000 children, I believe, in various daycare centres and in child care facilities in this province. And obviously, even with a number of people who spend a great deal of time monitoring the facilities, that is from the licensing officers in the Department of Social Services through to the Daycare Facilities Review Committee, who last year visited some 467 daycares, and many of them more than once, some as many as 5 times when they were concerned. Mr. Speaker, I can provide the honourable members of the opposition a checklist for them in terms of the items that are spoken to when licensing officers go in. It is interesting that they mentioned there are no standards, because we speak to accommodation, is the facility well maintained, fire extinguishers, emergency plan posted, fire drills, first aid kits, indoor play equipment clean.
Order, please. The chair is well aware there are standards. Thank you. Supplementary question, Lacombe. Edmonton Calder.
A supplementary question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. We all know that there are some pretty horrible things happening in some daycares, and that inadequate monitoring is taking place in this province. Well, when will this Minister respond to the concerns of many parents and increase the number of inspectors in this province?
Mr. Speaker, we have what I believe will prove to be a very excellent initiative and a pilot project to bring more consistency. This is certainly something I had been concerned about across the province with respect to how the daycare regulations are being interpreted, particularly by the operators. Mr. Speaker, we have had in-service training go on over the last number of months. We have asked every daycare operator in the province of Alberta to attend a series of sessions, and we believe we are making great gains, particularly when the pilot project is concluded, and we will be able to bring more clarity to the regulations that are in place.
Edmonton, Meadowlark.
To the Minister of Social Services, could the Minister please inform the House, since funding is an issue with respect to daycare at this time in Alberta, how negotiations with the federal government over the new federal daycare program are proceeding, and when it is that we could expect to see those funds arriving in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on the federal government's timetable. I have in the past and have been severely burned. At this point, I would say that officials from our department are discussing with the officials of health and welfare federally and relating to them all the information with respect to Alberta daycares, the amount of our funding, and what it is that we would expect by way of cost sharing.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the Minister of the Environment on an issue about which he has been neither silent nor informative, this week the Minister of the Environment has spent a lot of time confusing 2 issues: his refusal to test pulp mill samples taken for their level of dioxin and his fantasies about a safe level of dioxin. And I would assure you, Mr. Speaker, there is no safe level of dioxin. And I wonder, is the minister aware that EPA tests have proven that 1 part per trillion of dioxin causes serious and fatal health problems, and that this has led everyone, apparently but himself and dioxin-producing industries, to accept that there is no safe level of dioxin?
Mr. Speaker, information is extremely important, and all members will recall that last year in 1987, all of the ministers of the environment in Canada, which includes the federal minister plus every minister of every province in the country, which includes progressive conservative ministers of the environment, NDP minister of the environment, liberal ministers of the environment, and a social credit minister of the environment, put out a document called Dioxins and Furans, the Canadian Perspective, published by the Canadian Council of Resource and Environment Ministers. I'd like to quote one line from the document, Mr. Speaker. So far, we only have conclusive evidence of one human health effect related to dioxin exposure, a temporary, non-life-threatening skin condition called chloroacne.
Must have come within a country mile of the question I asked. I wonder if the minister is aware that no one, not even industry, has disputed the dioxin test protocols used by the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, the Federal Environment Department in Canada, who could get results in 6 days, and in Sweden. And if so, why will he not accept the protocols they've been using?
Mr. Speaker, the information provided with respect to the protocols is incorrect. There's an international debate going on that includes countries of Western Europe and countries of North America, both Canada and the United States, attempting to find a defensible, conclusive protocol that all scientists in the scientific community will agree on. I've indicated before, I indicated in the House earlier this week, that there's no difficulty getting a test made for dioxins. The difficulty is quantifyingly being certain of what it really means. Is it going to be 1 part per quadrillion, 1 part or 20 parts per quad million? If there's a challenge that I'd like to leave with the NDP. The NDP gets nearly $1 million a year in research dollars provided by this legislative assembly. I have less than 2 blocks away from here 24 samples of water. I'd be very, very pleased to give the NDP caucus contents of these 24 bottles of water. They can go and have this water sampled. They can table the results in this assembly. And then we'll wait for the real
Supplementary question, Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you. I don't want to see the bottles. I want to see the results of tests.
Honourable, order, please, honourable member. The chair would kind of like to see a supplementary question.
Yes, immediately. Will the minister commit himself to providing the results of tests that will show how much dioxin is in those samples, or is it that he doesn't trust the people of Alberta to know that information?
Mr. Speaker, I hope that all 2,350,000 citizens of Alberta are currently watching the question period. I'm going to look straight into that camera directly in front of me and tell all these 2,350,000 citizens in Alberta that I've already made that commitment. It's located in Hansard. It can be found in Hansard of either March 21-22 of 1988. That's a public document made to all citizens of Alberta. For the member from Edmonton Glengarry to stand up and ask the question, will the Minister of the Environment make that commitment, is absolutely nonsensical. The Minister of the Environment has already made that commitment. It's included in Hansard. Anybody in Alberta can have it.
Edmonton Glengarry, final supplementary.
Thank you. I think we should look at real motives, and can the minister somehow allay the fears of Albertans who suspect that the real reason for delaying the test is to make sure that Dioshawa is under construction before the public finds out how much dioxin is being produced by the pulp industry?
Mr. Speaker, that is absolutely stupid. There is no pulp plant. There is no pulp plant on the Peace River in Alberta. How in the heck can Dioshawa, which hasn't even been built yet, be producing dioxins? We are going to provide all of the information that we get from quantitative tests. We have samples. I gave a challenge out on Monday. That anybody wants to come with me, I'll take them by the hand, man or woman in this case, take you by the hand and take you over to the Alberta Environment Building. I also indicated that we are sending samples, Mr. Speaker, to Wright State University in Ohio. That will be done.
Order, please. time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to finish this series of questions? Opposed? Oh, heck. Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Vermilion Viking, and then by Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid what's been in those bottles, the minister's been sipping on it a bit, but would the minister be kind to view the fact that he does not want to go ahead with an analysis under the rather strange excuse that he hasn't built the pulp plant yet? Would he be prepared to tell us what it would cost to have that analysis made, and just possible the opposition parties may have the money in the budget to send it out and have it analyzed for him?
So no problem at all with that, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is the NDP caucus gets nearly $1 million a year for research. It's my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that the leader of the Liberal Party gets nearly $400,000 allocated to the Liberal caucus for research. We've got 24 bottles of water. Each test costs $3,000. 3,000 times 24, $72,000. I watched the leader of the Liberal Party stand in this assembly the other day on the basis of his research, held a sheet of paper. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't tell that during the question period. I went home and watched this on Access Television. An article from a newspaper. A newspaper costs 25 cents a day times 365 days per year. It doesn't come out to $400,000. The Liberal Party can pay for this. I'll give them the samples. They can get it done and table the results in this assembly, Mr. Speaker.
Vermilion Viking, followed by Clover Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplemental to the minister. Could the minister tell the House if an average forest fire in the province of Alberta dumps as much dioxin on the people of Alberta as does a pulp mill for the entire year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure glad that one of the government members has taken the time to read the pamphlet on dioxins and furans. Because if they would see a statement say, where do dioxins and furans come from? And they will see that the biggest supplier of dioxins is municipal incinerators, then wood waste operators, then sewage sludge operators, then slash burning, then fuel wood burning, motor vehicles, and forest fires, Mr. Speaker. All of those are listed, Mr. Speaker. The biggest contaminant is municipal incinerators. The NDP has yet to raise a question about that.
I like your tie, Walter.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of the Environment, basically I was going to ask a question about dioxins in fireplaces. Can the Minister indicate if there's been a study specifically done in this province as to what dioxins are produced by domestic fireplaces?
Mr. Speaker, there have been a number of studies done with respect to this, and in fact, in the fall of 1986, I put out a press release with respect to this matter, and as I recall, re-amplified it again through 1987. We tend to make a lot of communications available to the people of Alberta, probably 1 or 2 a day on average. Sometimes they're picked up and sometimes they're not, but we did put one out with respect to the fireplace contamination that does exist.
Time for question period has expired. I understand a point of order. Calgary Buffalo.
With respect to Standing Order 23, paragraph G, Mr. Speaker, in relation to your ruling that my question was out of order. The question related to why lottery expenditures are not presented for detailed review in the legislature. The world obviously doesn't turn on whether I get to ask this question or not. However, the integrity and respect for our legislative process does depend on the ability of elected representatives to ask questions on important public issues unless some good reason exists for declaring such questions out of order. I would submit that such reason is not present in this instance, either on the basis of principle or on the basis of detailed analysis of paragraph G of Standing Order 23. This standing order precludes reference to any matter pending in a court where any person may be prejudiced by the reference. And I wonder whether the Speaker would rule on the question of what person it is who would be prejudiced by such a question as I was asking the minister in this instance. I await with particular interest whether it will be suggested, as it was once before, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that I and my colleagues are the prejudiced parties, and if so, whether the suggestion will be made with a straight face.
We can take it.
Now, most significantly, however, I would suggest that a key test of these questions would be whether the question would stand on its own regardless of whether or not there is litigation in process. Now, the question of whether or not $113 million of expenditure should be debated in this legislature, I would submit, stands totally separately from whether or not such debate is legally required. Now, I understand the minister is preparing legislation which will presumably clarify the situation. I have stated publicly that our litigation will be withdrawn if the issue is in fact clarified. However, regardless of such clarification, the same question will still remain relevant and will be asked in this legislature. Should the $113 million be debated by the members of this legislature in a detailed manner? Now, the fact that this question remains relevant regardless of whether the litigation stands or falls is, I submit, the greatest evidence that the question doesn't refer to any matter pending before a court. It's not related to the litigation within the terms of Standing Order 23G, but it's rather a question of broader public interest relating to the democratic process. So in summary, I would ask the Speaker whether he might clarify for the future edification of members of this House his basis of ruling under Section 23G with particular specificity as to who it is, which person is prejudiced by a question of this nature, and on what basis is it a question relating to litigation as opposed to a broader question of policy and under the democratic process.
A series of questions arose courtesy of the member for Calgary Northwest rather. And as long as that particular member dealt in terms of the disposition of the funds or was asking questions about future disposition of funds from the lotteries, then the line of questioning was indeed in order. The moment that the member for Calgary Northwest then raised the question with regard to policy, then that question was immediately ruled out of order, and the member took notice and went on to another supplementary question. The chair later then recognized the member for Calgary Buffalo, standing yet again with respect to discussing the issue of policy and having the funds brought into this assembly for discussion and disposition. The chair is very much aware of the interest of the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo in this whole issue. Nevertheless, in the course of last year, it was the honourable member from Calgary Buffalo, together with the colleagues from the Liberal caucus, who indeed breached the privilege of this House by going ahead with a civil action. The action which still is, according to, excuse us, the action which I have here in the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta, Judicial District of Edmonton, between Sheldon Schumer, Calgary Buffalo, Betty Hughes, Edmonton Gold Bar, Grant Mitchell, Edmonton Meadowlark, and Nick Taylor, member for Westlock Sturgeon. And Her Majesty the Queen and Right of the Province of Alberta is represented by the Minister of Career, Development and Employment and the Provincial Treasurer of the Province of Alberta. To our knowledge, as of checking the records in the last few days, this action is still in place and is therefore still active, and then brings us within 23G subsection 2, I do believe. Subsection 1, rather. A member will be called to order by Mr. Speaker if that member refers to any matter that is pending in a court or before a judge for judicial determination. The statement was given to the House on May the 14th, and if members, including the member for Calgary Buffalo, have forgotten that, I'm sure that they can use their own ability to go back and research what was said to the House at that time, and that is still the decision of the Chair, which continues in the whole precedent of this House, which follows on a ruling made by Speaker Amarongin on May the 11th of 1978. And at that time, the statement was made, not only should questions and answers and debate in this House avoid the appearance of influencing judicial proceedings, they should also not be used as a means of getting information which could conceivably be useful in those proceedings. Procedures of the courts are designed for getting all the information necessary for those proceedings, and it would not be proper to use the question period as a sort of adjunct or an aid in regard to court proceedings. End of quote. And the quote, again, as made by the chair May the 14th of 1987, also carries through this. And one of the questions is raised by the member for Calgary-Buffalo is who indeed might be prejudiced by the action. The answer still is the 4 members of the House who brought action and the 2 members upon which it was served. It is still out of order with regard to the policy questions. Orders of the day.